Hi, and welcome back to Gender Studies, and this is our last week. Now there's a special note here I want to make. The material in this chapter is especially sensitive and potentially polarizing of women and men in the class. In reviewing this chapter, it is extremely important to channel your viewing in this as a productive and objective, as objective as you can. Having said this, I respect everyone has had different experiences regarding power and violence, and as such, I have taken a lot of effort to sort of minimize the emotionally charged graphics in my videos here. I understand if anyone would prefer to review the text instead of watching the video, please feel free to do so. However, I'll do my best to be respectful and present this material as a means of shedding light on the sensitive issue. Isolated incidents of violence may occur because of individual pathology. However, individual ideologies cannot explain why violence is pervasive. When we consider the social construction of gendered violence, widespread violence against a particular group does reflect views and values. So let's begin a look at gendered power and violence. The many faces of gendered violence, as I mentioned in the introduction, individual pathology won't explain the wide range and widespread violence against a particular group. And in this section is a particularly heavy in categories. So we're going to go through most of these categories. So here we go. Gendered violence includes physical, verbal, emotional, sexual, and visual brutality that is inflicted upon and disproportionately or exclusively on members of one sex. Gender intimidation exists when people, because of their sex, gender, or sexual orientation, are treated in ways to make them feel vulnerable or unsafe. Now, this is also called street harassment, a common form of sexualized remarks made in a public space. LGBTQ people or people who do not conform to gender norms also are subject to gender intimidation in the form of humiliating, disrespecting, or imposing violence. Sexual harassment is unwelcome verbal or nonverbal behavior of a sexual nature that that links academic or professional standing or success to sexual favors that interfere with work or learning. Women are the predominant targets. One form of this harassment is called quid pro quo. And quid pro quo harassment is the actual or threatened use of professional or academic rewards or punishment to gain sexual compliance from a subordinate or a student. This form of harassment depends on power difference. The person seeking the sexual favors must have some kind of power over the other person. A hostile environment harassment is unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature that interferes with a person's ability to perform a job or to gain an education. It's also conduct that creates a hostile, intimidating, or offensive work conditions because of sexualized contact. This form of harassment is often between peers. A hostile environment grows out of a pattern of behavior. A single action is unlikely to meet the legal standard. Sexual assault is any sexual activity that occurs without the informed consent or at least one of the persons involved. Now, one type of sexual assault is rape. And for many years, marital rape was not recognized as a crime. In 1982, in Canada, rape in the marital relationship became illegal. That was only 1982. Trans people are particularly vulnerable to assault. 1 in 2 50% are sexually abused or assaulted in their lifetime. The definition of sexual assault includes the concept of informed consent. Informed consent is only given by an adult who is of a typical mental abilities and who is not under the influence of alcohol or drugs and who is not being coerced. Children cannot give informed consent, nor can inmates who are coerced. Sexual assault has been a major problem on college campuses. One reason for the prevalence is the existence of what is known as rape culture. And this is where it's defined as common attitudes and beliefs and practices that ignore, excuse, or encourage, even normalize sexual violence. Many people, including college students, believe rape myths, such as rape is usually perpetrated by someone who is a stranger to the victim. An estimated 90% of rape victims know their assailant. Claiming that a woman deserves to be raped because of her behavior or dress is an example of blaming the victim and holding the harmed person responsible for the harm that another has inflicted. Fewer studies have focused on perpetrators of sexual assault and rape. One study found that 6% of men reported they had raped or had attempted to rape someone they knew. Of those men, approximately 2/3 were serial offenders, meaning they did more than one offense. Sexual assault is not confined to civilian contexts. It is a serious problem in the military. The Department of Defense, this is in the U.S., survey revealed that 90% of female cadets experienced some form of sexism, including assault. In 2008, the United Nations designated rape as a weapon of war. Rape has throughout history been used as a means of ethnic cleansing, humiliation, and intimidation. Frequently, rape in these contexts goes entirely unpunished and is inflicted on very young children. That's in the wartime version. Intimate partner violence includes physical, mental, emotional, verbal, and economic power used by one partner against another partner in a romantic relationship. Intimate partner violence is experienced and perpetrated by both sexes and by all sexual orientations. 25% of U.S. women have been violently attacked by husbands or boyfriends. Bisexual women are far more likely to be beaten, stalked, or sexually assaulted by an intimate partner. At least 30% of women worldwide have been victims of intimate partner violence. So in that realm, control is key issue for many abusers who want to control their partner's appearance, their behavior, their relationships, their lives. Violence between intimates typically follow a cyclical pattern. There's mounting tension. There might be the explosion. And then, explosion and violence. So that's the second. Then there's some remorse, and then there's an apology, and then there's a honeymoon period. Now you're going to see that breakout box in your textbook. It's on page 248. So you can check that out there. Both women and men can be abusers, but there are general differences in the type of violence committed by men and women. Women tend to verbally abuse, slap, or shove partners. Men are more likely to use their bodies and weapons to commit assault. Abusive men assaults are typically more severe. Men who engage in domestic violence tend to overestimate how common such behavior is, or they underestimate the amount of harm that they inflict. Men tend to use violence to enhance their own self-esteem and win respect and exert control. Women are more likely than men to to use relational aggression in romantic relationships, hurting the partner by manipulating social relationships, for example. Now, stalking is a form of intimate partner violence. It is repeated pursuits that are uninvited and unwanted that makes the target of the pursuit concerned for his or her own safety. Now, some of us may be unfamiliar with this next category if we look at power and violence, and it's what's known as genital surgery. It has also been called genital mutilation and genital cutting. This practice continues to be a practice in some countries. More than 200 million women and girls have been cut. This includes the practices of suna, a clitorectomy, inflibulation, and male circumcision. Now you can see these in your textbook for further explanations. You'll find them on page 250 to 251. Genital surgery is rooted in cultural traditions which can only change when members of the culture resist them, such as the Chinese citizens fighting against the practice of foot binding. We're going to touch on another delicate topic here, and that's gender-based murder. And there's two facts that we can associate with gender-based murder. One is when both sexes are given proper care, females will generally outnumber males. Second fact, however, in many countries today, men outnumber women. These two facts can't be true, can they? Well, the reason for this is gender-based murder. Women being killed before or after birth. To protect women, reproductive technologies can selectively abort female fetuses and select sex prior to an in vitro fertilization. Others reduce the number of women through female infanticide. It's the active or passive killing of female children. Femicide is the killing of women and takes the form of adult women who simply disappear, dowry deaths, or bride burnings. Femicide is not confined to developing countries. Consider the statistics of intimate partner violence in the United States and Canada, or the mass killings of women. Montreal Massacre, and that was in December 6, 1989. Then this spawned what we now know as the White Ribbon Campaign. You could also consider the number of missing Indigenous women in Canada. Reproductive violence is coerced or discriminatory infringements on reproduction rights. This includes forced exploitation that prohibits someone from having free will over the decision to become a parent and a parent existing children. In the United States, it took the form of eugenics and state-funded programs that forcibly sterilized women involuntarily. Now, certainly if you've been reading and watching what's been going on in the States more recently, looking at the Roe versus Wade abortion rights issues, you can see that this is still very currently very active. Racism has long affected reproductive regulations, with programs offering poor minority women free birth control, but deny other health care services. Commercial surrogacy is a fairly busy trade. Commercial surrogacy disproportionately affects poor women. In this practice, wealthy women who are unable to conceive or carry a child will pay a poor woman to carry the child for them. The power dynamic is problematic here, with many women making the decision to become surrogates based on their own property and need for money. So what are the cultural foundations of gendered violence? Individual pathologies alone cannot explain the prevalence of gendered violence. And we've touched on in the previous lesson the normalization of violence in the media. Gendered violence is frequent and varied in the media. On films and TV and in music and video games, pornography is sexually explicit material that favorably depicts subordination, degradation, and non-consensual sexual behavior. Distinctly erotica depicts consensual activities desired by and pleasurable to all parties. One study found that men who viewed mainstream pornography were more likely to say that they would commit rape than men who did not. The normalization of violence by institutions, and we'll start with schools. Now, in the United States, there are 55 colleges and universities subject to investigation because they have or may have mishandled investigations of sexual assault. Here in Canada, we have our own mishandling of the investigations. Many students say that they are not taken seriously when reporting rape or other sexual assault. Colleges and universities want to preserve their reputations. The White House established what they called the Special Task Force in 2014, which provided information and resources on preventing and responding to sexual assault on campus. Now, this has happened here in Canada as well. Georgian has focused more on student safety with postings and apps for security purposes. Now, we can touch on family and family's role in perpetuating or not perpetuating gendered violence and power. In families where violence does exist, children may grow up with the assumption violence is a part of marriage. Families may encourage women to stay with violent men for economic security, because it's her duty, or for the sake of the children. Immigrant women and women of color may be especially vulnerable to pressures not to report intimate partner violence. Let's move into law enforcement. The current legal system does not offer sufficient safeguards for victims. Some law enforcement officials and judges give greater priority to maintaining the two-parent family than they do about the safety of survivors. Laws governing restraining orders need to be strengthened so people can get protection before tragedy occurs. We can move into language and see where language plays a role. Language sometimes reflects and sustains cultural acceptance of gendered violence by obscuring the seriousness of an issue. Passive language that obscures moral responsibility for violence by not indicating the abuser fosters permissive attitudes towards abuse. Labels like domestic dispute, a sex scandal tend to minimize the reality of what's actually happening. Resisting gendered violence, so where do we go from here? Well, we all have personal efforts that we can do to reduce gendered violence. The most basic personal choice is to decide that you will not engage in violence in your relationships. Period. Refuse to be silent and refuse to be the silent bystander. Speak up, act to prevent violence. Can joining groups on campuses or in communities, write letters or call to media, teach your children that nobody has a right to touch them in a sexual way or to touch them without permission. Social efforts to reduce gendered violence, well, these efforts can include supporting educational and social service institutions, voting for laws that will reduce violence and punish those who commit them, and work with others to educate communities and create resources for victims of violence. A minor but still significant example is the NFL announced in 2014 that it would take more serious stand against violence in the league. There have been lots of examples where that doesn't seem to have played out quite what they intended. That's where that whole point about your intentions don't matter, it's your actions that matter. So how about taking a voice? Well, direct power is the ability to make others do what they don't want to do but you can make that happen anyway. That's the element of direct power. Agenda setting can be efforts to shape the public agenda or to engage in agenda setting in a professional and social relationship. Voice is communicating with others and engaging in everyday acts of principled resistance. One way to do this is to adopt the treacherous identity. That was from chapter 4. Or to challenge existing attitudes and practices in everyday life. If you see it, call it out. Say it. If you say it, it gives something to talk about and to resolve. Take an active role in your life and in your gendered identity life. All right, everybody. That was a tough chapter to end on. However, I hope you have a better grasp of gender, culture, and communication. And notice throughout the course that gender and sex are not the same. They're related, but they're not the same. And that sex is biology and gender is learned and socially constructed. And it varies from culture to culture, country to country, time to time. All right, everybody. Good luck. I hope you have a great holiday break and we'll see you in the next semester. If not, good luck on your career. Bye now.